I'm Matt Downing, and welcome to Diving Deep EDU.
Curious conversations with all types of peeps. Encouraging innovation, we are diving deep. Certainly education is what we like to speak. Fervent with dedication, now it is time to teach. Yeah.
Hey everyone, and thanks for joining me on Diving Deep EDU. This podcast is based in conversations that are willing to go off on a rabbit trail or two in order to find those aha moments. Those times when someone is able to say something in a way that brings increased clarity. Now, I'm an educator, so much of our conversations will have that as the end goal. How can the things that we are talking about help us to dive deeper into educational practices? Thanks for tuning in. Our guest today is Betsy Struxness. Betsy has had extensive experience on Broadway, including her time in Wicked, Memphis, Matilda, and as an original cast member of Hamilton. Beyond that, Betsy is a multifaceted artist, enjoying photography, writing, choreography, works, dance, fitness, and creating content. Betsy, thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing?
I am doing very, very well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well, definitely. And excited to be talking to you today and just, sort of see where this conversation goes. And let's get started talking about your photography and your travel, right? You like to travel and explore the uniqueness of being human and sort of capturing that through photography. And I'm really interested in that. And if you could tell me some of the places that you've traveled. I don't like to use the favorite, right? Because it's so hard to pick that down. Like, how do I pick my favorite? Maybe just some of the ones that are on the top of your mind. And what sorts of uniqueness have you been able to capture in some of those places you've traveled to?
Oh, good question. So my mother was really into photography when I was a kid and growing up. And of course, that was in the days where it was all film and it was not digital. And she fully had an SLR camera with a removable lens and whatnot, and knew all about the techniques of what it took to take a well exposed photograph on film. But it wasn't really until the digital age came around that I started really getting into photography, where, that instant gratification and where you could look at something and be like, oh, that's dark, and make adjustments. So it was easier for me to learn quicker in the digital realm than it was in the film realm. And so I started getting into it in like the early aughts, like 2004, 2005.
Okay.
And then in 2006, I was out on tour and I still had the same little Pentax Optio camera that had been a hand-me-down from a boyfriend at the time. And it was like this tiny camera that fit in an Altoid tin. And I sort of had maxed out the creativity in 3 years of what could happen on that Pentax Optio. So then I was getting off of the All Shook Up tour in 2007. And then I went and bought myself a camera at this big camera store in New York, where I asked them, I said, I want to learn more about photography. I need something I can grow with. And so they recommended the Canon Rebel. And so I bought myself a Canon Rebel and a couple of interchangeable lenses. And then I took myself on a 6-week trip through Europe. And I traveled alone, although I visited friends while I was there. But my camera was really my travel buddy. And so to be alone for so long and just traipsing around these gorgeous cities, just looking for inspiration, looking for art, things that caught my eye, it went a really long way in helping me shape my artistic eye. And so I went from London to Munich then to the Czech Republic. I went to Prague,
Yep. Yep.
Vienna, um, Venice, Florence, Cinque Terre, Rome, Zurich, uh, Amsterdam, Stockholm, and then back to London.
Okay, you did a little traveling.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it was amazing, and I loved it so much because I had never studied abroad.
Mm.
And traveling across Europe was just something that I really wanted to do. And so that sort of lit the fire of travel photography for me. And then once I got into Wicked in Chicago, I then started to take it. We don't get a lot of vacation time working in theater. You get 1 week every 6 months. And so
Oh,
I,
wow, that's not a lot at all.
no,
No.
and and so then anytime I got my week vacation, I would take it, and unfortunately for my family, I was never that kid who took my vacation to, like, go home to visit my family. I pretty much always just went out of the country. And so in Wicked, it was, like, Belize and Curacao, and then once I got on Broadway, it was, like, Greece, Iceland,
Mm.
Morocco. Iceland and Morocco are 2 of my top along
Okay.
along with that 6 weeks in Europe. And then there's also 3 weeks
Right,
in Australia and New Zealand, which
so it
was
gets hard to.
which was also pretty awesome.
Hey,
Um,
Betsy, before we go on, you mentioned a place in your Europe trip that I wasn't familiar with. I think it was Cinque Terre?
Cinque Terre. Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
Okay.
tell me about that.
Cinque Terre is in Italy, and it was recommended to me, by a friend of mine, and it was by far my favorite place that I went to in Europe. So it's
Huh.
the 5 lands, Cinque Terre.
Oh,
Um,
gotcha.
and it's these 5 little towns that are right on the West Coast, up north in Italy,
Mm.
near La Spezia. I think that's the, like, biggest town that's near it. And all of these 5 towns are connected by this old trading path, um, that merchants and stuff used to take in order, to sell their wares and whatnot. And these little 5 towns are either nestled down in this, like, bay right on the water, and everything is sort of built up around that, and there's, like, no cars around, or there's one of the places that's right on a cliff. And so you're taking this little narrow path that is just on a cliff overlooking the Mediterranean for
Wow.
9 kilometers. And I did
Mm.
I did the hike there and back. So I did like 18-kilometer hike in one day, and it was just gorgeous. And I would take pictures along the way, and then each time I stopped in a town, I would, take like 10 or 15 minutes and go swimming in the water. Just, like, put my
Aw.
stuff to one side and then, like, go swim and cool off because it was in the summertime and it was really hot.
Mm.
But it
And
was
what was it like in the towns? Are they filled with tourists or were they welcoming? Did it feel authentic? What was that like?
Oh, it felt totally authentic. Barely anyone spoke English. When I got there, um, because I never really pre-booked my accommodations. Because at the time, you could, like, arrive at a train station and go to the information stations, and they would be like, "These are the hostels that are nearby or the places where you can," they have rooms open for the night, and I'd be like, "Okay." So, I also really had to use the restroom when I got there. So I kept going to these little, like, hostels being like, "Hey, do you have a room?" And they're like, "We're booked." I'm like, "Great. Can I use the restroom?" And they're like, "Sorry, no." I'm like, "Okay." So
Oh man, that's rude.
then I got directed to an internet cafe.
Yeah.
So I went to the internet cafe where the gentleman who ran it allowed me to use the restroom. And then he had a connection with an older woman who lived in Monterosso, was where I was staying. And so she lived in Monterosso, and she had a couple of rooms that she only let out to women travelers. And so he called her, and I got a spot for the night. And this woman spoke not a single lick of English. And I spoke not a single lick of Italian. But I had my little, like, phrase book, so I could
Yeah.
say, like, "Hello, thank you, no thank you, excuse me," and that. So I stayed with her for, like, 3 days,
Oh,
and,
that's cool.
we just sort of, like, smiled and nodded at each other in passing. But it was just this, these tiny little Italian towns that were just gorgeous. They're known for like lemons and olives. And so like I
Mm.
tried their limoncello, wound up getting snagged into like a mini date with some Italian man who
Uh-oh.
treated me to dinner and olives and, was a little handsy when he shouldn't have been. And then so yeah, so that was my experience in Cinque Terre, and I took my camera everywhere and just took
Mm,
so many pictures. I think I came back from Europe with like 3,000 photos or something that I needed
mm,
to go through. Oh, and this was the
mm.
time too where like it was still the beginning of the digital era. I was traveling without a laptop and I had some device that allowed me to take the photographs off the card of my uh, camera and put it onto my iPod, like my actual iPod, because it was an
Oh, wow.
iPod video. So it kind of worked as an external hard drive. And so I could just dump my photographs there
Hmm.
to keep them safe until I got back to the States to be able to like relook at my photographs and whatnot.
Yeah, now thinking about your photos and your travels, because it sounds like they're kind of intertwined.
Mm.
What have been some unexpected events that you've been able to capture and experience through your travels?
Well, when I was in Prague, there was a like fire eater or fire breather who was kind of a street performer. And so I was trying to capture him, like, spewing fire everywhere. And it was really hard, of course, to capture because it was
Mm,
also at night.
yeah.
And so I was just trying like all these different settings on my camera. And then I tried sport mode. And so it's put all of the settings in the right place for me at night and quickly so that I
Mm,
could just like depress my shutter button as he was getting ready to start like spitting gasoline, I guess, onto this sort of fire stick to make it explode. And I captured this incredible picture of just this like swirling fireball and this man sort of lit up in the swirling fireball. And there's not much else around them. And
hmm.
so that was really cool. And then I did something similar in Iceland years later with a geyser. And so I was trying to capture the explosion of a geyser and I put it in sport mode and s- the geyser I think would explode like every 10 minutes. And so I stayed around for a few rounds of it to figure out when it was going to blow. And so then once I figured out when it was going to blow, I pressed my shutter button right before and I got this fantastic photograph of the geyser um, just beginning. And so it looks like this interesting bulbous
Hmm.
water sculpture in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that was really cool as well. And then I've
Huh.
been fortunate enough that a few of my Broadway shows have allowed me to use my camera backstage.
Yeah, I've seen some of those.
So I have some amazing photographs of Memphis, of Matilda, of Hamilton, and even some of the other ones like Leap of Faith, which was a flop, and Scandalous, which was a flop. Um, and I have a ton of photographs of Wicked too. So I have like the transformation of the witches from being regular women to being green women, or like Fiyero becoming a scarecrow, or Bach becoming the
Mm.
Tin Man. And so those are really special as well because they bring back so many good memories, but they're also such amazing events to witness, and so few people get to witness them.
Your examples, or at least the ones you've shared, really show how you're utilizing photography to sort of try to capture some sort of transformation. Do you think that's true?
Yes.
What about that is interesting to you?
Well, I think all of us human beings get so caught up in like the product.
Mm.
Especially in the United States, being a capitalist
Yeah.
country, we're very
Hmm.
product oriented and,
Yeah.
like everything has to be like polished and
Hmm.
presented and like,
Hmm.
social media ready and stuff like
Yep.
that. But we all know that you can't get there without
Mm.
process. And being in theater from a very young age, I mean, I've been in theater all my life. I'm 39 now, and my first performance was when I was 6, like my
Oh,
first professional performance. So I've always been privy to backstage, and I love being backstage. And to this day, one of my favorite things to do is to go backstage at a Broadway show, even though I've been in
mm,
numerous ones, but just to see like how they, how they fit everything in, how the sausage gets made, how the puzzle works.
mm,
And I think a lot of people have that curiosity,
yeah,
and so getting that transformation and seeing transitional moments in life show that the transitional moments are actually just as magical as the
yeah.
product.
Yeah, I wanna shift to the backstage, that's really interesting to me, but before I do, there's probably some photography heads out there, some tech heads, gear heads. They might be wondering, what kind of equipment is she using? If you could just give us a real quick, equipment update, and then I wanna transition, hearing your thoughts a bit more about the backstage.
Oh, sure. So I have a Canon 5D Mark II that I got in 2011. And then I got a Sony Alpha 7S, I guess, or maybe it's just no, Mark II, Sony Alpha 7 Mark II, that I got in 2015. And then I wound up leaving Hamilton in 2016. So I haven't really had the funds to like update my equipment, although it is on the list of things that I want to do. Although both cameras still take gorgeous
I bet.
photographs, because my Canon is what I use for like headshots and portraiture. And it just makes these images that are so painterly in a way, like reminiscent of the details of like Renaissance paintings and things like that. And then the Sony
Mhm.
takes these wonderful sort of like cinematic looking shots. Like they almost look like an incredible film still. Um,
Hmm.
and so I love both of them for those reasons. So those are the two things that I shoot on mainly.
So bring us backstage because when I go to, a Broadway musical, it's obviously an amazing experience. And sometimes I'm peeking back there trying to see what's going on.
Hmm.
And I'm just really curious. Can you bring us back there a bit? And for the person that has never seen back there, but maybe imagining what it's like, what's the
Oh,
backstage like?
the backstage is as much of a show as the show itself.
Mm.
I mean, everything has a place. There is traffic pattern choreography because you
Oh,
have
wow.
wardrobe people who have just helped somebody with a quick change, and they have to get one costume out of the wing, and they have to, go and run under the stage in order to be back on the other side of the stage to do a costume change with somebody else with a different costume. So you've
Mm.
got that going on. You've got all the crew folks who are preparing props and set pieces to go on in various wings at various times. And then you have all of the cast members going in and out of the play space, the stage and the backstage area. The stage manager is usually somewhere able to sort of see the majority of what's going on sometimes, whereas in like Wicked, the stage manager who is calling the show is like in a box seat.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, whereas a lot of stage managers are usually backstage, like, standing near the first wing or something to be able to call the show. And it's cool. Like, it's dark in a way, but it's also really bright because you have all the stage lights, like the side lights that come through, of course,
Mm.
light up the backstage area. So you have these great colors on people's faces and these dark shadows and these bright spots. And so, like,
Mm.
the lighting is really moody. And then when you have, special effects and you've got like haze or you've got fog or something, then there's that as well. And it's just I love being backstage. I love watching shows from
Mm.
backstage,
Yeah.
because I really do I like seeing the stage lights. It reminds me of going to concerts, and it just feels, makes you feel kinda like a rock star.
What's the energy like, backstage?
The energy, I mean, it's up. The energy is alive for sure. Just, like I said, it's as much of a show backstage as it is on stage. So that energy level that is happening on stage is happening just as much off stage. And then when people have downtime, there also tend to be little rituals. So you'll find different pockets of people like dancing to a particular part of a song that they're not on stage in, but they're just, enjoying time with their friends. Or, in the case of Matilda, there are like secret handshakes that the adults would have with the kids. And so it would happen every single day at the same time. The same kid would go up to the same adult and they do the same handshake before like going on stage, or one of the kids would fart and then go down the slide and all the crew members would be laughing. Like it just, for the most part, like when you're backstage and you're running a show, it's usually really good energy because it's what we
Mhm.
love to do and it's what we're
Yeah.
there for.
And what were some of your rituals backstage?
Um, I'm definitely one of the ones who will dance here and there. Although in Hamilton, I think my ritual every time I came off stage was just to relax because
Hmm.
the dancers were on stage most of the time and the show
Yeah.
was about 3 hours.
Mm.
So we were moving that whole time, and anytime I came off stage, I just wanted to, like, stand still or maybe even,
Mm.
like, not speak. Um, but, like, for Memphis, I was one of the double dutch girls. There were 2 of us who had to do double dutch, the jump roping with 2 ropes,
Yeah.
and when I first got in the show, I thought I had it. And then, like 3 weeks into my run, I sort of messed up the ropes again, and I realized it was because I was tired and I just couldn't
Mhm.
get my feet to move fast enough that day. So after that day, every single show, I would uh, go upstairs because our dressing room was downstairs. So I'd go upstairs and backstage for about 2 or 3 minutes while the song was going on. But before I had to enter, I would just
Mhm.
jump up and down to the beat of the music so that my heartbeat and my energy level was at the tempo of the music so that by the
Hmm.
time I got ready to double dutch, I knew exactly what tempo those ropes would be. My body would know exactly what tempo those ropes would be turning.
Oh,
And
wow.
and after that time, I almost never made a mistake with
Hmm.
those ropes.
I want to talk about Hamilton a bit. With Hamilton, or maybe a different musical that you've been a part of. My question is this: how do you disconnect from the music? So I find myself after listening to Hamilton or different Broadway or watching it, I'm like humming it. I can't get the music out of my head, and I'm thinking about someone like you who's performing it day in, day out. It's part of who they are. How do you disconnect from that?
Well, we go through the same thing. Whenever and I find this whenever I'm learning a show, I do that. I can't get the music out of my head. I wake
Okay.
up thinking about it. I go to
Yep.
sleep thinking about it. Every commute was thinking about the music. Like I could not get the music out of my head. But that's because I was processing it and learning it. But
Hmm.
once the show is sort of in your body, you can allow like I you don't have to think about it as much. And so then when you don't have to think about it as much, it doesn't stick with you on that daily basis the way that it did
Hmm.
when you were learning the music. It happens and it usually takes like probably a month or so, if not longer, to really get that sort of thing out of your system where you're like the day that you can finally go to sleep not humming the songs, you're like, "Oh, that was the best night's sleep ever."
So that becomes after you stop sort of learning it, and then you're not reciting it in your mind anymore?
Yeah.
Now, what's the process like for you after a show? I'm sure there's a lot of energy that goes into a show. What's your process after that to sort of bring it down, so you're able to either go to sleep or do something else?
Very good question, and this is, not necessarily for young ears, but a lot of the times there is substance that is involved.
Okay.
Um, and, it helps just to sort of take the air out of that energy a little bit. Like, it's not to get
Mm.
obliterated. It's not to be like, oh my God, I just knock me out. It's just to
Yeah.
sort of like lower the, you know, I kind of think about it as lowering my diaphragm, if that
Hmm.
makes any sense. Like, my diaphragm when I'm performing sits pretty high in my chest because I'm dancing and singing.
Yeah.
And so, that energy's right there. And that way my abs can support all my dancing. And so I find that after a show, I really need to be able to sort of lower that diaphragm to be able to take a deeper, more relaxed breath.
Hmm.
And so that's what substance can help with sometimes. But also, a lot of us don't go to sleep until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Your show gets
Yeah.
done, at 10:30 at night, maybe even
Mhm.
11, depending on what the show is. And then
Mhm.
if you're in New York City, you've got to commute
Mhm.
home. If you have a pet, you have to walk that pet. You probably haven't
Mhm.
eaten since 6 p.m.
Mhm.
dinner, 7 p.m. maybe. I mean, I would always eat for an 8 o'clock show. I would want to eat around like 4:30 or 5
Yep.
so that my food would be completely digested and I would just be on
Mhm.
energy.
Mhm.
And so I would also need to eat when I got home. And then I would need to do body maintenance as well.
Hmm.
So I would either take like Epsom salts baths, or I would use like a foam roller to help roll out some of my muscles, or stretch a little bit, do some light yoga, things that aren't too taxing on the body because I had already taxed it so much during the show. Uh,
Yeah.
I would try to find the laziest maintenance possible. So that's what I would do. It was a lot. So then, like I said, you're not going to bed until about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Some people, it takes them longer and they go to bed at like 4. Yeah, because you got to let that adrenaline wear off.
Yeah, and doing it every night, is there any negative effects of ramping up that adrenaline, sort of on a daily basis?
Oh yes, and that's where I was in Hamilton. I was in that sort of like negative cycle of
Okay.
like knowing what I had to accomplish during the show. Everything that happened to me in the day during the day would affect my show.
Hmm.
And so, like, I wasn't taking my dog to the dog park as much because the dog park was like a mile and a half away and I would walk him
Hmm.
there. But when I have a 3-hour dance performance to do every single night,
Mhm.
thinking about walking 3 miles with my dog on concrete, I was like, well, I can't do that to my body. And so I felt like I wasn't a good pet owner. Um, the the schedule as well, and like the ramping up of the energy, because it takes so long to go to bed. Of course, you're sleeping in as well.
Mhm.
And then, it's hard to participate in the lives of your friends and your family because you're constantly tired, and you're constantly thinking about, well, if I wake up early to go, wherever, like I'm not going to get enough sleep for my body to recover from the show I did the night before. And so then the show that this night is going to be even harder. And am I going to get enough sleep for the 2 show day that I've got after it?
Hmm.
And so it was constantly in my mind that everything I did in my life affected the show. And I was very tired of living for the show.
Hmm.
And so I was like, okay, it's time to go be a better dog owner,
Hmm.
participate in my personal life and my family life. Because it just, it's 6 days a week, 8 shows a week, 6 days a week, 52 weeks a year.
Yeah, it seems like that would take a toll. I mean, you've talked about, with your pet and relationships. I'm also thinking about the body,
Mm.
it needs time to sort of, I haven't studied any of this, but it seems like it would need time to sort of build that back up and those storages.
Oh, absolutely. And I was one of the oldest dancers on stage in Hamilton. And so, also having been doing this since I was so young, by the time I was on Hamilton, that's 32 years of dance abuse on my body on top of doing 8 shows a week, 6 days a week. Um, And luckily, because of the education that I've had in dance, the classical upbringing, I know so much about um, the efficacy of body movement and how it's supposed to work. So alignment helped me stay injury free. It also like that institutional knowledge, that education also let me know how much maintenance I needed to stay injury free, and that
Mhm.
maintenance was absolutely 100% necessary. And
Mm.
so it helped me like not go out to a bar afterwards, and I would go home and do what I needed to do in order to recover so that I didn't injure
Mm.
myself.
There are so many powerful songs in Hamilton and the other Broadway musicals that you've mentioned that you've been a part of. Thinking about Hamilton or maybe another one that comes to your mind, what has been one of the most powerful songs that you've been a part of as you've been performing?
Oh, wow. Good question. So, I mean, in Wicked, Defying Gravity is just it's amazing for so many reasons, and I know that was an inspiring song to me for years. And then in Memphis, it wasn't a song that I sang, but it was sung by the character Felicia, and it was Colored Woman. And I loved it because it was written for an alto, basically, and not a soprano. And a lot of Broadway music, the women sort of have to speak up here, and it's all very delicate and cute. Um, and I'm obviously not that woman. And so this song was just very like guttural and low and powerful and big. And so I loved hearing Montego Glover and Danielle Williamson and Tracy Beazer and Ashley Blanchett. Those are the women I heard sing that song. And it always gave me chills because it's a sound you don't get to hear a lot on a Broadway
Mm,
stage. And so I loved it. And then Satisfied, forget about
yeah.
it. In Hamilton, Satisfied, it was my first love. It continued to be my love throughout the run of the show. It will forever be my love in the show because I can relate to that a lot about never not necessarily. I mean, sure, in romantic relationships too, but I basically mean in life of never feeling satisfied and like always sort
Mm,
of feeling like I need to do more, or there's some sort of duty, or there's just some sort of bigger thing that keeps me from
mm,
being just straight happy with what I have in the moment.
yeah.
And then in Matilda, it was When I Grow Up. I loved that song so much, and we as adults got to swing on the swings with the kids, and it was my favorite part of the show every single night. And I when I got off the swing, I then got to like lie down on the stage while Miss Honey finished up the song. Yeah, that's what it was. And it was nice to just lie in the middle of a Broadway
Mm.
stage and look up into the stage lights and be like, "Yeah, I'm here. That's real nice."
You've been performing, like you said, since you were 6. What do you think has drawn you to be a performer and to be doing it for your whole life?
Oh, man. I mean, to be shallow, there's the attention part of it, but and I'm sure that's, like, what drew me as a kid, like, I got positive praise as a child for what I could do as a performer, and I could follow directions well, and so, it was easy for me to please people in that way, and I'm my default setting is a people pleaser, even though somehow I'm, like, kind of an anarchist too. Um, so performing was a way to do that, but it's just the way that performing makes a person feel when they're doing it is kind of like a drug. And
Hmm,
it's addictive and it's powerful. And for the most part, it is incredibly uplifting and like confidence building. And so I sort of feel the most confident and powerful when I'm performing.
hmm.
And so that's what keeps me coming back, is that it is where I feel like I am the best version of who I am.
Yeah, Betsy, you've been you're obviously known for your role in Hamilton and some of the other musicals that you've mentioned, but you also have many other artistic pursuits. If we go to your website, we see the photography, we see the patio jams, we see the work dancing, we see so many different ways that you're expressing yourself. Can you talk about some of that and sort of what's that process looking like for you right now?
Absolutely. So, as a young person, I was so focused on performing, so focused on ballet, on Broadway, that I wasn't really developing many other sides of myself, and like, what other interests did I have that went beyond performing? I didn't really explore that. And then um once I finally got on Broadway in 2010, it was a nonstop roller coaster that I'm super grateful for, because I was one of those people who was fortunate enough to bounce from show to show to show.
Yeah.
And that's when you get to be that person on Broadway, it's kind of exciting because you've seen it happen for other people, and you think to yourself like, well, that must be great. And and in and and in a way, it is. Yeah, they're like, it is, because it makes life a lot easier,
Yeah.
but it also
Mhm.
it it went far to burn me out.
Mm.
So my debut was in 2010. 2 months later, I was in Memphis. So my debut was Wicked in 2010. 2 months later, because I was only in Wicked to for somebody's medical leave. And so that was always temporary. And then I got Memphis, and I was in Memphis for 2 years. Not for lack of trying to get out of it, though, because I was auditioning still all the time. And so,
Right.
I had dance calls 2 or 3 times a month, if not more than
Mm.
that, on top of my Broadway show, going to singing auditions, TV auditions, like doing the whole thing.
Mhm.
And luckily I had Memphis, and luckily it ran, because, I had a sort of a 2-year drought where after I booked Memphis, I couldn't book anything else.
Mm.
And so then in 2012, I booked Leap of Faith, which was my first originating show, and I had to do double duty. So I did 3 weeks of double duty where I was rehearsing for Leap of Faith during the day and doing Memphis at night. And
Oh,
on
wow.
2 show days, I would start at Leap of Faith in the morning, go to the matinee of Memphis, come back to Leap of Faith between shows, and then after rehearsal was over, go back and do my nighttime show.
Oh my goodness.
So that was for 3 weeks. And then, yeah, and then Leap of Faith in total only lasted about 2.5 months, because once we opened on Broadway, we closed 2.5 weeks later. And
Okay.
so I was fortunate enough to get offered my job back at Memphis. And so I had 6 weeks off where I moved from like Hell's Kitchen to Queens. And then I started back at Memphis, and my first show back at Memphis, we got our closing notice.
Wow.
And I was like, okay. So I scrambled, for more auditions, because I at least had 6 weeks to find another job instead of these 6 days that I had with Leap of Faith.
Mhm.
And so I scrambled, and I got another job in another new show called Scandalous. So I had like 4 weeks off where I took myself down to the Dominican Republic for a week with my camera and a lot of books, and just like laid by the beach, read, and took
Mm.
pictures before starting
Yeah.
Scandalous. And then after we opened Scandalous, let me pause and go back. I had learned my lesson about original shows with Leap of Faith. And so I told my agent to keep auditioning me while I was in rehearsals for Scandalous, because I was like, I don't trust that this show is going to run.
Mhm.
And at that time, Matilda was auditioning. And
Mm.
I had heard like one voiceover and some underscoring of Matilda. And I was like, that show, I want to be in that show, because it sounded kind of like
Mm.
Harry Potter. So I was
Yeah.
like, that show's going to be great. Hadn't seen any of it. And so I wanted Matilda. And so I was gunning for that. I was auditioning for that while doing Scandalous. I booked Matilda before Scandalous even opened. And then Scandalous closed 3.5 weeks after it opened. I had 3 weeks off, which was luckily over the holidays, before starting Matilda.
Mm.
That's still 2012.
There's a lot that happened.
So I like left Memphis, opened Leap of Faith, closed Leap of Faith, went back into Memphis, closed Memphis, opened Scandalous, closed Scandalous, and started my rehearsals for Matilda all in 2012. So then once I got Matilda, I was like, okay, cool. I am ready to park it here for a while.
Yeah.
So, and then I also was tired of being in the ensemble by that point. So I had said to myself, like, okay, this will be my last show in the ensemble, unless something very special comes along. Enter Hamilton. Um, and so I tried to get seen for a principal for Hamilton, but that wasn't happening. And so then when I got called in for a dance call, the project was just too cool, and
Yeah.
I had been introduced to Satisfied,
Mhm.
Helpless, and Say No to This before the dance call. So I had heard
Mm.
Satisfied, and I was hooked. And so
Mhm.
then I got in that dance call and just immediately was like, oh, I need to get this job. Nobody has ever asked us to dance like this in a Broadway audition. I feel powerful. I feel strong. I feel sexy. It just felt good.
Mm.
Um, and so then once that started, I was doing the workshop of Hamilton while doing Matilda. And so it was the same double duty. And so I was like, up every morning, walking my dog 2.5, 3 miles to doggy daycare, before going and rehearsing all day, and then going to my show at night and having like somebody else pick up my dog at doggy daycare to take him home. Um,
Mm.
and so I was just burnt out. By the time we ended the run at the Public Theater, I was absolutely exhausted. My body hurt, and I I didn't understand then that what I needed was nature. And so after leaving Hamilton, um, I kind of went into a depression at the beginning of 2017, and because I just was like I don't want to do ensemble work anymore, but nobody's really seeing me for principal work. I'm not getting any TV work. Like I've gotten voiceovers, which is great, but like nothing is like the plans I had for my career are failing.
Mm.
And so I started to get depressed, and then I reached for a book called The Artist's Way. Have you ever heard of it?
No, I haven't. Who's do
It's
do you know the author?
Julia Cameron, and it's a 12-week program of writing exercises and visualization exercises that sort of let you know what you want in a really interesting exploratory way.
Hmm.
um, and so I started doing The Artist's Way, and that's where patio jams came from,
Hmm.
because I was realizing that I'm like, oh, I want more control of my artistic life. um, and I'm tired of New York. Like I was tired of the concrete and steel and, dirty subway platforms. And so then I started like taking trips out to LA, and it was like, oh my God, there's sunshine and warmth and trees, and like you can go hiking in the city. I'm confused. Um, and so the more and more I started to realize that, I was like, oh, okay. So all of my priorities have changed. Interesting. And so The Artist's Way was when I realized that I needed to start using my own artistic voice, but I hadn't developed that while I was coming up through Broadway because I'd been so focused on it. That now is the time, that I'm using to really figure out what it is I want to say and how I want to say it. And so all the various things that I've got a finger in right now, that's me getting educated. And it's trial and error. It's just like, well, let's try my hand at editing. What is, like, And so with the patio jams, I just was like, well, I love fashion, I love dance, and I want to see, what I can accomplish in sort of a video setting or a film setting, and things that are social media friendly, because of course I didn't start my entertainment career with social media.
Mm.
And so social media has come up, you know significantly. Like, it started when my career was already significantly going, and so to start incorporating social media into my like routine, I didn't do very well. And so I wanted to create these like videos or these art pieces or whatever, to be like, oh, let me see what I can, see how my artistic voice looks in the social media realm. And so that's why I started doing the patio jams, was just to create something, anything. And the easiest way for me to create anything interesting is with dance.
Mm.
So that's why I started with the patio jams. And then, now like my editing skills they've grown so much in 2 years. And then I've been making these little videos with one of my drag queen buddies. And that's been fun to like pick music and then edit to the music. And then I realized that when I'm editing the storyline, I'm also editing the storyline to music, because of, the way Hamilton is built, the way rap is built. Certain words need to land on the downbeat because they're the word that you want to pay attention to. So like that's the kind of stuff I put into my, minute and a half drag queen videos. Like, they're a lot more complex and thought out, um, than they than meets the eye upon first
Yeah,
viewing.
yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm just weaving all of my experiences together, um, in hopes of just taking more control of my own life,
Hmm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Did I
that's
answer the
exciting.
question? That was a really
Yeah,
long.
yeah. Yeah, it's exciting to hear, and as you're talking, I'm, like, envisioning these different strands sort of coming together, and I'm seeing this, like, journey, right? And it's a journey you've taken, but it's also an educational journey that
Yes.
you've mentioned, and that's powerful. It also seems like, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but this journey, this process has been really helpful for you to recover from some of those things you were mentioning. Is that true?
Oh, 100%. Like, when I was in that depression, um,
Mhm.
like, my my partner and I at the time we owned an apartment in Brooklyn, and so like the mortgage was so large that I didn't have extra money to like go to therapy. And I knew that that's what I needed ultimately, but I didn't want to be away from my dog. I didn't want to interact with New
Mhm.
York City. I didn't want to get on the train. I
Mhm.
just didn't want to leave my home. And so the artist's way was like therapy for me. And it was exactly what I needed, because it really did expand my mind creatively,
Yeah.
and really helped me see what the problems actually were. And it was,
Mhm.
like, I was angry all the time and my edges were so sharp. And I just knew that I needed a break and I needed to slow down and I needed sun and nature and the beach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's exciting to think about the role that that journey has played, in your journey. And you also teach, right? You
Mhm.
teach and you enjoy teaching, and I'm just interested to talk, really well, somewhat briefly about this as we start to wind down this conversation. When you're teaching, what do you think makes a successful learning experience for your students?
Oh, goodness. One where they walk away having grasped some of the information, and in a way that leaves them, like, with a smile on their face and wanting more.
And how do you do that?
Ask questions, ask the question, does anybody have any questions? And, really listen to what people have to ask, but also to give people different ways of learning the information, not just showing them, but breaking it down and explaining it to them, not necessarily breaking it down and explaining it to them in absolute dancer vernacular, but in like layperson's terms so that art doesn't have to be this like esoteric discussion in order to participate in it in a meaningful and significant way.
Hmm. What has been an example of a learning experience where you feel that the students sort of got it, right? The light bulbs went off and you were smiling to yourself because you're thinking, yeah, this is great. And the kids are smiling to themselves, or at least it seems like they are. And they're saying, yeah, this is great. What was a experience like that?
I mean, luckily, I've done a lot of instead of being an instructor who gets the same students over and over again, I do a lot more like masterclass scenarios where I only get a unique group of individuals for that limited time, and that's it.
Hmm.
And so, one of a really fun experience I had was so my sister has a dance fitness company called Work, which is who I teach for. And so she's in this dance fitness realm, but because of me growing up in, ballet and in theater, she has such an appreciation for that side of dance as well that one time she brought me to Chicago to teach like a Hamilton master class, but the majority of people I was teaching to were to the people who take her dance fitness class. And so they've had fairly like no dance training or very, very little
Mm.
dance training, let alone have they ever taken like a real dance class that
Yeah.
breaks down the choreography and, especially for theater, because theater isn't necessarily as successful in the dance fitness world. Um, and so watching this group of women, adults, dance this piece, and my sister was in the class, so watching her dance it as well was super fun, and then my cousin she came down, and no, she lived in Chicago at the time. Did she? I don't know. Anyway, but she was also there, and so then at the end of class, my sister filmed the 3 of us family members, dancing together,
Oh.
and watching that video brings a huge smile to my face because it is incredible how well the 3 of us danced together. Like, our musicality was almost completely in sync. We were dancing together just so well, but our individual styles came out too,
Mm.
and it was just nice to see, 3 adult women who belong to the same family and have
Mm.
come to dance in different ways in their life, come together and do this thing and, like, match. It was crazy.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, and thanks for sharing that story. And I really appreciate the how you're elevating sort of the joy of learning, like the smile on your face. Like that was the story you wanted to share, and the story of a good learning experience is the children or the student, however old they are, smiling. And so often, I've seen that we're sort of ignoring that and not bringing that to the table as significance. And I've seen, when a student has a smile on their face, they're engaged and they're learning, whether it be dance or something else, to such a greater degree, and it shows we're really hitting something that they're enjoying.
I 100% agree, and I think because I came up in almost the exact opposite way is the
Hmm.
reason that I want to
Interesting.
is the reason that that's what I wanna give in a dance class is because, I was in, like, professional ballet program by the time I was 8, ultimately, on point by the time I was 9. Like, I was being trained as a professional ballerina, and then I went to these, summer programs when I was younger at School of American Ballet in New York City, Pacific Northwest Ballet in, Seattle, like, when I was middle school aged,
Hmm.
and while I still loved them, like, I've never necessarily been in a wonderfully nurturing dance environment, but I love dance so much, and I just wish that there had been more joy. Because I remember
Mm.
at Juilliard, where I went to college, um, I felt like the teachers only ever gave dancers a compliment when the dancer was having such a crappy day that they were literally crying in class.
Hmm.
And I would watch that and I'm like, I don't want a compliment because I'm crying. I want a compliment because I'm good or
Yeah.
because I'm like doing the thing. And so
Mhm.
that impacted me a lot. And so when I come into a classroom to teach dance, the thing I want the most is for people to be able to enjoy themselves.
Yeah. Why do you think educators, whether it be in dance or in schools, try to scrape that joy away? Why do you think that happens so often?
I wonder if it's that they think it's not like you have to be serious in order to be
Hmm.
effective. When some of my favorite teachers growing up were the teachers who had a great sense of humor and brought so much joy to the classroom. Like one of my world history teachers in 7th grade would come dressed like we'd be talking about the Greeks, and so she would be in a toga that day, or we'd be talking about, the Renaissance era, and she would be in one of those like cone hats with a scarf hanging off of it and some weird dress. Standing out in the hallway, just greeting the students like everything was normal. And it
Mm.
was so much fun. And so I remember a lot more about world history than I remembered from US history because none of my US history teachers ever made it fun.
Yeah, that's a great thing to remember, and that's really resonating with me. And thank you, for sharing that and bringing that to the forefront. Betsy, we have to bring this podcast to a close. It's been wonderful talking with you. As we come to a close, who would you like to give a shout out to?
Oh man, my family. My parents have been incredibly supportive my entire life, and they continue to be even in this crazy time of me being like, I don't know what I'm doing, but this is what I'm doing. They're like, okay.
Mm,
My sister Haley, who is like the biggest champion that I have. Um,
mm,
I've been enjoying working with her and work fitness so much because it's great for our time and our ideas and our wants to be overlapping. And my brother Reed, he's always been super supportive too. And so my family is they've just been stinking great. Like they've been my rock, and
oh.
I could not do what I do without them.
That's great. It is time for the final word. What would you like to say to close out this podcast?
Oh man. I mean, education is the key to enlightenment.
Mm,
Just in
yeah.
everything. I mean, you and I are having this discussion as we're about to have an election tomorrow. And,
Hmm.
like knowing how politics works, having that education, knowing it makes you want to participate more and it makes you have an opinion. And so, like, just read a book, read a magazine, read a
Yeah.
newspaper, like try and glean all the knowledge you can from everything you do.
Betsy, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me on Diving Deep EDU. I appreciate your time, sharing your perspective, all of those wonderful stories. To those listening, thank you. Thank you for tuning in to Diving Deep EDU. If you like this episode, subscribe, share it out, post a review on Apple Podcasts. All of those things will help get this podcast out to more people. Until next time.
Wow, it's time to reflect. That's astounding. You've been checking out the podcast from Matthew Downing. Hope you like diving deep like a scuba diver. And the show provoked hope, that's our true desire.